Canada doesn't want to look or sound racist by saying there's undue Chinese Communist Party influence in organized crime, because one of the first things that the Chinese Communist Party does is say this is racism. When it's like, well, no, the part of this that we are upset about is not the fact that we have Asian people going to school in Vancouver. That you're trying to throw us off. That's a red herring, or that's almost like a false. This is just a redirection or misdirection. The problem that we have is that you're dealing fentanyl. I don't care what color you are. The problem is you're selling frickin' drugs that kill people and using the money to do all kinds of other illegal things. We don't really give a crap about what nationality you are. You just happen to be Chinese because you're affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, right? We want to throw all the white people dealing with this crap in prison too. You're not alone here.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's called elite capture. So there are a lot of people, you just talked about people saying, oh, we don't want to do that because you're going to capture a lot of people, if we have a RICO law or if we really start to scrutinize all these transactions. It's invasive. But no, who's saying it? These are real estate developers. These are politicians funded by real estate developers. These are lawyers getting fat rich off of this Vancouver model. And in the exact same way, you absolutely have people that are doing CCP talking points. A good example, we had the Canadian parliamentarians wanting to vote to sanction the genocide in Xinjiang. And then we had some very powerful senators standing up and saying, no, that would inflame racism, which is just the worst kind of cover-up argument you can make when we're talking about a genocide of a disadvantaged people on a huge level, and then you're going to pick up the CCP talking points to give them cover and say that this is going to inflame racism if we call it a genocide.
Yeah. You know what else inflames racism? Having one specific ethnic group run organized crime in a particular country for decades at a time, totally unchecked. That also harms innocent people. Like, look, again, my extended family here from my wife, they're Asian. So they're Taiwanese and Chinese. So when there are problems with China, it inflames the racism and it ends up in the media. However, if we don't do anything about these problems, people are going to become very frustrated, and then it's going to be 10 times worse, and it's going to last a lot longer, right? It's like we have to kind of rip off the Band-Aid here and do something about this so that it stops being something that makes the news cycle all the time and seems like a consistent problem, because that's what really inflames racial tension in any given area. Are you afraid to call and talk to your parents? I know if my mom lived in the equivalent of modern-day Nazi-controlled area, I don't know if I would be like, hey, let me see what's going on. I mean, I would miss my mom, but I just wouldn't want to attract attention.
I did not I lost contact with my parents for about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Before May 2020. After Speaker Pelosi appointed me to serve at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, it's a voluntary government work. I called my mom. Knowing that the Chinese will listen, I told her the news because I don't want somebody else to come to tell the news. So since then, I've been able to communicate. But this is not the case for vast majority of our fellow Americans and citizens of Europe and the others in the Uyghur diaspora. Because, again, go back to IJOP. In addition to IJOP, the Chinese have a mobile data scan machines, cyber police, omnipresence everywhere. So if you have contact, like a call history, text messages, voice messages with your foreign contact, specifically if you have a WeChat on your phone, the government monitor your phone calls, your activities real time. There's nothing like WeChat in the world today. It's a combination of Amazon, eBay, your PayPal, anything, WhatsApp. It's a combination of many things. So each and every one of the phones, handheld devices in China, it's not must, but have this app. That itself let the government to monitor you. So because of that, because of the random data scan on the streets, compelled the Uyghurs to tell their family members around the world not to contact them.
Oh, wow.
So I was and my parents told me not to contact because if they find the traces, this is so dramatic in 2000, during the period of 2017 and 19. So a lot of people end up being in the camp because of the caches on their phone, the phone call records, call histories. So there are still, it is still the case with vast majority of the Uyghur diaspora. Thank God, because of my U.S. government official status, knock on the wood, I've been able to communicate.
Yeah.
I was even able to see my father's face through a video call when he passed away on April 3rd.
It's the amount of insane, oppressive 1984 style control and repression is really next level. I've just never heard anything like this in my life. You say they do a data scan. I assume what you mean is the police can just look at your phone at any time using some kind of machine, and they're going to look at all your texts and calls just walking around.
Yeah, this is Googleable information. If you just Google some search terms, you will actually pull up the Uyghur individuals dreadfully handing their phone in to cyber police, letting them scan their phones. And also, as I describe in the book, because of this intrusive surveillance techniques that could result you into a concentration camp, some Uyghurs tried to use the dumb phone, and then the authorities come, what are you trying to hide from us? So
Right.
even you, so you can't. So either way, it's catch-22 situation for the individual. So they made a decision. Okay, if I don't see my children in this world, if I don't talk to my children in this war, the Uyghurs being a deeply religious, they said, okay, we'll meet life after.
So sad. Surely this didn't happen overnight. Can you tell me about how this transformation of Xinjiang happened? I mean, I assume you kind of saw, hey, this business closed that sold religious books. Wow, that person just vanished. This seems to be like it couldn't have just happened overnight. Sure, the mass arrest, the 17,000 people in 10 days, that was a big jump, but I assume this started as a slow boil.
So, Jordan, this requires a little bit of a China politics discussion,
Okay.
if I may. I
Sure.
will give you a little bit of a background. This did not start overnight, and this was not something that a Chinese leader or leaders got up on the wrong side of the bed, decided to commit acts of genocide. This has been in the works for a long time. This goes back to 2009 when the Uyghur youth took to the street to protest in Uyghur capital Urumqi, resulting from this toy factory in Guangdong beating up the Uyghurs enslaved in the toy factory and killed and injured. So that was the beginning. That was the trigger. So essentially the Chinese leadership says or told themselves or promised, we can't tolerate this anymore. We used to allow the Uyghurs a life and manage them with carrot and stick. We allow them to become wealthy, build businesses, travel outside the country. Can't do that anymore. So starting 2009, 2012, and 13 was a kind of a transition period. And also we cannot miss mentioning the supreme leader, Xi Jinping, came to power in 2012. So in 2013, Xi Jinping published a speech. It's called that Number 9 document. That Number 9 document essentially it promoted something called management of ideological battlefield. If you look at the Chinese wording, it's very powerful. Even when Xi Jinping's warning Biden about Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, he used that very a profound word that could be interpreted in many ways. So Xi Jinping wants the management of the ideological battlefield. So with that, he come up with something, essentially, from all the way from Deng Xiaoping to Xi Jinping, hide your strengths and bide your time. So in that concept, so what the Xi Jinping regime did was, okay, these people will not going to be able to have the life of the Uyghurs or practice their religion. As long as they maintain this lifestyle, as long as they maintain this religious practices, it will be ideological threat to communist ideology. and it will be impossible to manage. And also, this is a sign of disloyalty. We don't allow Western religion, foreign religion, namely Christianity and Islam, because it comes with a Western ideology, and it's attracting to the Chinese population, attracted to that Western influence. So what do? We need to do syncretization of religion, rewriting the textbook, Bible, Quran, main target. This is why they're targeting the Catholics in China today, as we speak. They're removing the cross from the church. They're also displaying Xi Jinping's pictures.
Wow, so creepy.
And then also forcing the Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, to preach Xi Jinping and promote Xi Jinping ideology in the places of worship. It's sickening. Xi Jinping ideology is not a religion. So that's what they, and then also finally, they see Xi Jinping regime, CCP sees religion and ethno-religious identity would play a source of future instability. What could be the reason for political upheaval? So in order to get rid of it, starting 2014-15, Xi Jinping asked his policy advisors, I described this in the book, to come up with a plan. They come up with a plan called 解决新疆问题最终方法, final solution to the Xinjiang problem.
I mean, that sounds like as Nazi as it gets.
Yeah, it does not say the Uyghur problem, but the Xinjiang problem. They reference they're very skillful. They're very careful with their language, and also they come up with a series of policy documents. And then in 2015, Xi Jinping thought, okay, this is a great idea. So who do I enforce this? And pick the guy that I was mentioning earlier. So this is all. This whole thing is Xi Jinping's project, Xi Jinping's pet project. He wants to have a fully controlled Xinjiang region so that his Belt and Road Initiative, his global ambition, China Dream, would have no obstacle. But the pushback is this. Xi Jinping already securitized this region. Former deputy ambassador to UN, Kelly Curry, often says Xinjiang and Tibet are the two secure places, most safest places on the face of the earth because of that heavy police presence. The social crimes is almost non-existent, Jordan. This is all like what they're dealing with, the political crimes, quote unquote political crimes. The social crime, like they used to have thieves, the murder, the traffic accidents, the drug, they're all gone. He didn't have to commit a genocide. But this brutal regime chose this method to make it legitimize Xi Jinping's rule, because domestic audience, the Chinese historically reward strong leader, loathe weak leader. He wants to show that he's doing something to secure stability at any cost. And then 2, he wants to show to the world that he cannot tolerate political dissent. And then 3, he wants to have a safe pathway to Eurasia market and the global influence operations that is coercive, corrupt, and corrosive, as described by Australian policy expert John Garno. So this is about China's future ambition. This is why I genuinely believe, as I made the case in the book, and as I've been saying in public, anyone treats the Uyghur genocide as another human rights catastrophe or crisis are mistaken. This is on us, because China is doing this to achieve a broader political objective, realize China Dream, achieve, essentially wanted to take over. And there's a Chinese proverb called 你死我活, you die, I live. So some of our politicians in Washington mistakenly put out this idea of coexistence. It does not exist. It's a zero-sum game for the Chinese. And they have tested out in Xinjiang. No one raised a finger except for the United States for the most part. Destroy Hong Kong democracy. It's gone. and posing daily threat against Taiwan. We're still dancing, tiptoeing around, chanting slogans like we're not against Taiwanese independence. We don't do this, we don't do that. It sounds like surrender even before somebody's challenging you.
It does not bode well. I mean, as we speak, Nancy Pelosi is pissing off all of the Chinese diplomatic corps by landing in Taiwan, which is good. I don't think we should back down from bullies. I don't think backing down from bullies, especially authoritarian states like that, has ever done anybody any good. I want to talk about the phone thing real quick because we didn't sort of finish that point there. The police are scanning your phones, but I've heard from people with connections on the ground in China that you have to take your phone with you everywhere. And you mentioned dumb phones. iPhones are banned because the police install this app on your phone called, it's something like Internet Soldier or something like this. And all of your location data, your communications are logged. AI searches through it. They look for religious words and phrases, among other things. And you can't even say Salam Alaikum, which is an Islamic greeting, to your friend on the phone because they will pick that up and say, you're a potential extremist. I mean, that kind of infraction can land you in a concentration camp. And it's just the amount of just the things of everything that we're talking about right now, by the way, is 10 times worse and more detailed in the book, right? The flag raising ceremony where you have to go, your attendance is monitored, they ban new items in behavior in books, they tell you what these are at this flag. It's like if you had to go to a Pledge of Allegiance ceremony and then they said, okay, you can't speak Spanish anymore, you can't celebrate Christmas, you can't go to church, the Bible is forbidden, if you have one, you're going to go to prison. It's just the most dystopian stuff you've ever heard, you've ever read. It's like East German Stasi, but with more invasive technology.
Exactly. And also, as you pointed out in the book, I also interviewed the genocide survivors, female genocide survivors, camp survivors. And the common theme that I heard from them is during the interrogation, it is so unbearable. Mihrigul Tursun, the youngest of those camp survivors, even begged the guards to kill her because she could not tolerate that torture, psychological, physical, even seeing the others being tortured. And also on top of that, the psychological torture, condemning your own God. Just let this sink in. If you're just devout Jewish believer or Christian practitioner or Christian individual, and some government comes to make you to condemn your God, that can break your mental health. That could break you. So in one of the interviewees, the camp survivors told me that they have to chant slogans such as, "Who was your God?" A new God, Xi Jinping.
Ugh.
So, and then they have to study the Xi Jinping thoughts as if that's a kind of a new religious textbook, day in, day out. So it is. Sometimes when you talk about these things, it sounds so unreal because it's hard to even fathom that this is even happening. And the disturbing aspect is that while this is all happening, we try to normalize this behavior, either to look the other way, feigning ignorance, or entrapped in economic interest. So it begs the question, like, what kind of future do we really want? When did we become this little? That we just let the regime, the Chinese regime, Communist Party, to do this against our values, against our will, against our historical promises. Never again. In 1945, American prosecutor Robert Jackson said at the Nuremberg trials, never again. That never again promise has been miserably failed. We've been breaking. I just took part of a documentary. The name of the documentary is called Broken Promise. The broken promise is essentially on the idea about why we keep seeing the genocide. After the Holocaust, we promised never again. Mm-hmm. So what happened to that promise, that vow, rings hollow today because of tepid and meandering responses that we're seeing in response to the Chinese genocide. This genocide will not end within China, because China has its cohorts, countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and some African countries, some Latin American countries. Their league of human rights abusers are growing. So their model will be replicated in the political repression, surveillance. So in the end, in some countries, even voting records will be surveilled, monitored, even some instances brought consequences to people who did not vote to a certain individual. And 86 countries already adopted Chinese surveillance techniques. So this thing is metastasizing.
Yeah, they're exporting a lot of their surveillance technology and techniques to despotic regimes around the world. That's probably a whole nother show. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons that the United States and other countries didn't want Huawei to run 5G globally, because they were going to be using that for surveillance and funneling the information back to China and into their AI machines. And I mean, it's just absolutely wild. You know, I like China a lot. I really do. And I've watched a ton of your travel videos. And then one day it was like, I left China. And we're going to talk about that in a second here, because you weren't just like, you know what, feeling like I need to get back in the snow of northern upstate New York, right? This is more like this sort of happened to you. How did this begin? How did your quick transition out begin?
So yeah, to make it pretty quick, like I said previously, we were filming our documentary, Conquering Northern China, and we were up in a contentious area of Inner Mongolia. When we got followed throughout that and interrogated over and over and over again, I knew that something was up, because when we were interrogated by the detectives 3,000 miles away from where I live, they were talking about me and Winston, my friend Serpent Zede, in the hallway about, hey, these guys work here. They previously had a contract that they left halfway through on. This is their wife. This is where they shop. They were literally going through details about us.
It sounds like you share one wife, which you don't. Just want to clarify
yes,
that.
sorry, I'm sorry. Anyway, very explicit details about us, and they knew everything about us, right? And it turns out that anybody, doing what we were doing, not journalism, just filming, they have massive files on them, right? They knew what supermarket I go to, they knew what restaurants I go to, they know who I talk with, they know, my preferences, they know everything I've done in terms of employment, they know what businesses I own, and all that stuff. And this is really far away from where I am. So it's kind of like, you can picture like you're in Florida and then you get pulled over for, speeding or something. And they start talking about like that one time that you went to a Barnes & Noble bathroom 3 years ago in California, right? It's very crazy.
It was a memorable experience. Yeah. But I can see them being like, why are you always buying so much caffeine-free Diet Coke at Target? And I'm like, excuse me.
Exactly. It'd creep you out, right? So, this is how the story transpired. As soon as I got back from that trip, I was 100% sure that there was something going on internally in China where they really didn't want foreigners going around without state-sanctioned minders telling them what to film and who not to talk to. And because we did everything ourselves and we kind of operated in this gray zone of we're not supposed to be interviewing people, we're not supposed to be traveling around and stuff, but we're going to do it anyway, as long as we don't step on any toes. It turns out that was the case, because I got a message from a friend of mine who had told me that there were police who were actually looking for me in this bar of a city that I lived in.
That's scary.
They were looking around with my printed out photo, right? Now you might think, hey, this is a surveillance state. Why are they walking around looking for you? Of course they know where you live, right? And they do. But I'd like to highlight the absolute disconnect with like a local police versus like a national effort. You in China, when you're a foreigner, you have to register to your employer. And my last employer was at a school that I worked at, in a university that I worked at. Technically, legally, I had to live on their campus, right? So I was registered to their campus as that was my place of residence, right? But the apartment that I bought, in my wife's name, by the way, Most of the paperwork is in my wife's name. I'm not registered there, right? So if the puny little local police or whatever are looking around for me, their record is that I'm going to be at the university, which I found out they had checked. They wanted to see where I was, right? Now, to really fast forward through things, it turns out that a fan of ours, and I say ours because of all the people that I have on our channel, stopped a friend of mine in the street and showed him a message. And I suspect that this person was actually in the Chinese government, but was either sympathetic to our cause or was hired to do this, but showed him a message that showed that there were people in multiple departments of the police or government looking for me, right? And the weird thing is I initially suspected it's got to be the traffic department. You know, I owned a custom motorcycle shop. Motorcycles are banned in a lot of cities in China. They think it makes the city look poor. It's this whole face thing. It's weird. But I rode motorcycles in China, right? So I was like, okay, it's the traffic department. They're going to slap me with a fine or something, stop riding bikes in our city, right? Putting it on YouTube. But it was actually three departments. It was the Public Security Bureau, so the department that's in charge of all the foreigners, making sure like they're doing what they should or not doing what they shouldn't. And it was also the People's Liberation Army.
The army was looking for you. That's scary.
So the army wasn't necessarily looking for me when those cops went to that bar to go look for me.
Right,
That was the start of something very, very sinister and crazy. But what happened was on these messages, by the way, which I got later on from an anonymous person that added me on WeChat, they said, as long as you keep me a secret, and obviously use some sort of alias or whatever when added me, I'm going to show you something, right? So I look at these messages, and they are screenshots from the People's Liberation Army, some in the People's Liberation Army, the traffic department, like I suspected, and the PSB, the Public Security Bureau. And they were looking for me because the PLA said that I had illegally filmed an army base in the city that I lived in.
Oh,
now,
man.
the ridiculous thing about this is that I had already been interrogated by police about flying a drone in the city, right? So this has been up in the air for ages. They've already questioned me about this a billion times. But when the PLA is reaching out about it and conspiring with other departments, it turns out this is going to be something way bigger than I initially thought. The ridiculous thing is that the footage that I took was a huge bird's eye view of the city I was living in. And that exact same footage was all over the Chinese internet. If you went on any Chinese, because YouTube's banned in China, if you went on a Chinese video website, you could find the exact same shot by a Chinese guy to the public world to see, right? Yes, there's a government base, like a speck in there, right? Just because that's in the middle of the city. That's what it looks like, right? So there was nothing technically illegal that I had done. It wasn't some secret footage that I was unleashing to the world. It was just some random shot of the city that you could find 100 times over on the Chinese internet. That's when it got nerve-wracking, right? All this kind of stuff transpired, and I immediately found my wife, and she said, you need to get out immediately. You need to leave the Chinese mainland border right now while we sort this out. My wife's fairly connected in the area that she lived in. I've always felt pretty safe there because of that. We have family members in the government and stuff. They hadn't got wind of a lot of this until later. So I was like, are you sure? Packed a little go bag. The reason she couldn't come with me, or my wife or my kid couldn't come with me, is amidst all of this stuff, all of this writing on the wall that China's getting super paranoid and crazy, I applied for her green card, and she was a couple weeks away from getting it. So her passport was at the American embassy. My kids' documents were at the American embassy. They couldn't leave China. So I told them, get over to another person's house, right? While I get out of here, attempt to get out of here before this all blows up. So I have Winston, I told you about the guy, Serpent and Zade, the guy that I work with. He takes me in his car and he lays me down in the passenger seat, and we just drive straight to the Hong Kong border. Now, remember, this is before Hong Kong's national security law, its own jurisdiction, its own legal system, its own law. There's still dissidents there. There's still, a lot of freedom there. So I get in line and I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm not even with my family. I have to get out of here and try to sort something out while I'm in Hong Kong, but I don't even know if I'm going to make it through.
Do you have to go, I assume you have to go through like an immigration exit line where they're like,
yes.
Oh, what's your name? Oh, that must have been, what was that wait like in that line?
I remember looking at some other people that were just on their phones, hanging out, chewing gum, like waiting to exit China and to go into Hong Kong. And I'm like, how do I act like them? How do I look more nonchalant? Because I'm literally going to die. I was like having a heart attack.
You're like looking around. You're like, I know I look so nervous right now.
I know.
What do I do?
My immediate thought was like, I must look so suspicious right now, right?
Sweating, like
yeah, I
dripping
was
sweat.
pouring sweat. So I go through the borderline, and I get up to the immigration guy, and I'm gonna paint a picture for you. In China, if you go through a border from a separate country, so Kazakhstan or Hong Kong or whatever, they'll have this like, how did I do? And it's like these weird dystopian looking smiley faces that you pick, you know? They mean nothing, by the way. That don't contribute to anything. But
We
you
have
stand
those
there.
too in the United States. It's like, how clean is the bathroom? And you're like, no one's looking at this. This
one's
machine is
looking at this.
broken.
Correct. The thing is, in China, you'll have the guards are like a little higher than you, and they're like looking down at you, and they're just like they're just so mean. They're usually so mean. But anyway, I give him my passport. And you don't need a visa to get into Hong Kong as an American citizen. So I'm like waiting there. I'm freaking out. I'm sweating. And he asked me for the first time, I've never heard this in my entire life. He asked me, do you have a Chinese name? And I'm like, after he scans my passport, and I'm like, what the, like in my mind, I'm like, why is he asking me this? I've never been asked that in my life. So of course I have a Chinese name, but I lied. My gut instinct was just say, no, just like, I'm just some dude, right? Pretend like I don't speak Chinese. So he goes, okay. And he stamps me through, and I get out. So right now I'm past China. I'm in the limbo. So I'm in Hong Kong / China's jurisdiction. And a policewoman stands right in front of me as I'm in limbo and shouts over to the border guy, the border cop. And she goes, is that Ma? Is like the name, right? Is this Ma, right?
Your name is Horse. That could
one
mean a lot
of the
things.
characters, right?
Yeah.
One of the characters. I don't want to give the whole thing, obviously, but
yeah, gotcha.
yeah, because it's like a transliteration, right? So I'm like, what is she on about, right? So then she goes over to talk to him, and immediately after she gets out of my peripheral, I go straight to the area where you scan your bag, and then you get in line for the Hong Kong immigration part to get in there, right? She comes back, she taps me on the shoulder, and she asks me in broken English, and she goes, are you going to Hong Kong, right? And I go, yes. And she goes, are you going to any other country, right? Are you leaving? And I was like, no. And after the conversation, she goes, are you going to come back to so-and-so where I was living? And I said, yes. And she goes, good. And then she turns around and leaves. Yeah.
That is really, really friggin' scary. So like they weren't, what do you think happened? Were they just not sure if you were you, and they're like, you know what, we'll deal with it when he comes back because we assume he's telling the truth? Like, it's such a weird situation.
I think it's a combination of, well, just to fast forward here, I got into Hong Kong. And
Yeah, you're alive.
Woo! Like time to go sort this out and talk to people and try to figure this out, because I have people in the government that I can talk to and try to figure out what happened. So anyway, after a lot of time, I initially thought, hey, this is just some bullshit where like they're being lazy or they don't want to deal with it right now because they're going to have to talk to the other side about what they're doing, detaining a foreigner, all this kind of stuff. But after a long time and speaking to a lot of people that have dealt with this kind of stuff, not just with China, but with countries all around the world, it sounds like they let me leave, right? And it was like encouraging me to leave. And the whole building the case and all this kind of stuff was definitely going to happen if I decided to continue making problems for them. But the fact that I left was kind of what they wanted, right? Letting me leave was like, okay, we don't have to worry about this shit anymore, right? This guy, we're getting heat from Beijing to not allow foreigners to do anything in the country. And if he's going to keep breaking this rule and filming and doing whatever, positive or negative, it's breaking the law from what they told us to prevent, right? So if I'm out, then I'm out. And a great example of a great example of why that's probably the case is Winston, my business partner. He stayed in China like 9 months after I left, right? And he didn't have the same problems with the local government going after him. We don't know. There's definitely some sort of case that was being built against him. But because he was one of a bazillion foreigners in a bigger city where he lived in Shenzhen, it didn't catch up with him yet, right? It would have caught up with him, just like it caught up with our friend Michael, the Canadian that was wrongfully detained in retaliation for Meng Wanzhou and the whole Huawei scandal thing, which happened right at that time, by the way.
Right. That's what was so scary. Is like in 2018, these two guys, I think they're both named Michael, actually, they end up in jail.
Yeah.
And because the Huawei, was she the CEO? She was
CFO, yeah.
CFO. So she's under house arrest in China. And then suddenly these two guys that live in China are now being detained in like crap hole conditions for how long?
For years. So, I mean, Michael's a friend of ours because he helped us with conquering northern China. He speaks fluent Korean. He was like a fixer for North Korean type stuff. And we were in an area where there was predominantly North Korean people. When I say North Korean people, I mean ethnically North Korean people that were Chinese citizens. And he was our translator. He helped us out in the region and stuff. And he was detained at that same time. And we were all connected to that, right? We were friends. We had communications. We knew each other. And all of these people started kind of either disappearing or getting deported at that time. So it kind of was in perfect line with that. I think Winston left at the perfect time as well. Maybe he could have left a little sooner, but it was definitely coming down to it because he was still filming and getting interrogated all the time to the point where I'm pretty sure that the police there were trying to kick him out as well. But so in this whole process, it took me a while to call the right people and confirm that's kind of pretty much what happened. I mean, they were building a huge file, and it was the season of where CCP officials get ranked up or ranked down. So they keep their job, or they get brownie points because they sucked up to the right person, or they ratted the right person out for tax evasion. And at that time, there was a massive incentive of the city I was living in to look for foreign spies. So you had Chinese people that were going on live stream that were calling the PSB, the Public Security Bureau, to say that I was an American CIA spy in China, right? You had them bragging about that, posting my whereabouts, saying we're going to catch this spy and stuff because it was so incentivized to go after foreigners that were kind of had a public face or appearance on the Chinese internet and prove that there was some sort of horrible entity that was trying to bring China down from the inside. So that all piled together that like people saw an opportunity. Hey, if I know this dude in the PLA. Hey, I know this dude in the traffic department. Hey, whatever. We can screw this guy over. He's a big figure. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, right? He's made these TV shows and stuff. If we go after him and prove that he's some sort of bad entity and he makes our life easier if we catch him, right? So in a way, I think the central government wanted me gone. And a lot of people were looking voraciously at doing something to me to propel their careers forward.
That's why you didn't get an exit ban, right? When an exit ban was when you try to leave and they say, sorry, you're not allowed to. And that happens to journalists or people that they don't like. But it's almost like they wanted you to get out, and so they let you get out versus keeping you there and throwing you into prison, which is
if I had
lucky.
gone back and they wanted to follow up on the opportunity, let's say the PLA wanted to collaborate with the PLA that had almost detained me up north, and they started building this case, they absolutely would have placed an exit ban on me. They would have made the phone calls to make that happen because it would serve their purpose, right? Thankfully, I think I got out at the very right time to where the central government's like, hell yeah, he's gone. But if I had waited a month or two more, that wouldn't have been the case.
The other thing that's crazy is, so your wife, she gets an exit ban from China, again, forbidden from leaving. And it's so crazy that the government can prohibit you from leaving the country without being convicted of a crime. Like if you're convicted of a crime, okay, might be a parole condition or something like that. But they can just say, hey, you're not allowed to leave. Suddenly, no due process. And then she disappears. And this is the part that is just Twilight Zone bizarre. So she vanishes. You start making calls. Nobody knows anything. And your sources tell you she was probably drugged and beaten up, and then they'll probably inject something in her spine and she will come out a zombie. What is the point of that? What does that mean? Are they literally going to inject her with something and then she comes out a zombie, or is that like a euphemism that I don't understand?
So what happened in her situation was beginning of 2017, she was banned from leaving China. And the way this is very common, banning people from living in China. So what happened was they don't even notify you. What happened is that you take your passport, you go to the airport, and you find out at the gate of immigration officer, well, you're banned from leaving. That's how you find out, actually. So she about 6 months, so she was banned from leaving beginning of 2017. And then in September 5th, she just vanished. She vanished. The reason I assume the state have taken her is, first of all, she was banned from the state, by the state, from leaving. Secondly, is on the day she vanished, is 3 other staff of her were vanished at the same time. So 4 of them vanished on that day. And then 3 of the 3 staff was disappeared for 3 years. And all 4 of them never been charged to today. Never been charged. 3 of them were vanished for 3 years and then reappeared 3 years later. So a year ago, they reappear. In the process, never been charged. And then she came out 2 days before my book came out and called me to cancel the book launch.
Right. So to clarify,
yeah.
Like her phone, you've been calling her for 4 years. Her mom's been calling her every day for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you write this book. She could be dead for all you know. And then suddenly she calls you on the phone from the number that had been dead for 4 years. That's the part that's crazy. Like, I want to highlight that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but the idea that you've been calling this person for years and their mother's been trying to reach him, no dice. Suddenly your book is going to come out. There's a press release and she calls you like, oh, hey, long time no see. By the way, don't publish your book. I mean, what? Your phone line is dead for 4 years. The news of my book comes out. Suddenly your phone works and you can call anybody in the whole world. Like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, that was the crazy thing. I mean, the reason I published the book, it was you talk about like taking a shot down the spine. It was about a year and a half after her disappearance. I was in London talking to this friend. He's one of the most respected economists in China, and then he looked at me and we were having coffee together. He looked me in the eyes. He said, she most likely not. They will never let her out, right? And I was like, all right. And then he said, like a matter of factly, like if they let her out, they're gonna give her a shot down the spine. She will come out as a zombie. That's the part I really shocked because he looked at. I mean, we know each other. We know him for a decade, and he's an economist. He's not even a security guy. And he talked it as such a matter of factly. It sounds like it's like a known practice. And that's the part that really shocked me. It's just like, really? You can do something like that? I mean, the state can do something like that? And they will do something like that? Because we know, the reason she was taken was most likely to be political. Mm-hmm. That's why they took her for years and years, and then we never charge her because obviously she has some inconvenience fact for the state. They don't want that to ever come out. That's what happened.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's so insane. Obviously, you can't go back to China, and you never would. You probably don't even want to fly over China at this point.
It's more than China. I mean, first of all, I can never go back to Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is such a part of China. I'm pretty sure if I land in Hong Kong, I would never come out. And given that they have kidnapped people, in different countries, so in countries that have very close relationship with China, I wouldn't go. Like country like Thailand, right? Thailand, there's a bookshop. Many of your audience may have heard of it. The bookshop published basically a satire on Xi Jinping, and then the CCP went ahead and kidnapped and arrested everybody from the bookshop. They kidnapped the owner, who is a Swedish national from Thailand.
Wow!
And the guy, and that's 6-7 years ago, and that guy's still in China. They put him on TV to renounce. He said he went on TV and said, "I don't want my Swedish passport. I don't want to be a Swedish citizen. I want to be a Chinese citizen so I can sit in jail." Essentially,
yeah.
They put him on TV to do that, and then there is major newspaper. They have stories like Dubai, like China runs a dark cell in Dubai. They were kidnapped. They were taking
a dark cell.
Yeah. They were arresting Xinjiang, the
Uyghurs, yeah,
the Uyghurs, and then arresting them in Dubai and shipping them back into China. So I mean, there are countries like that. I obviously can never touch one.
Wow, that's terrifying. So we've all been getting these, well, an absolute ton actually of these wrong number scam texts. And at first, I was confused. I just thought well, obviously the first time I thought it was an actual wrong number, but after the third in a given week, after getting these once every 6 months, maybe before that, I'm like, okay, something is going on here. And they say something like, "Hi, Cheryl, can you take my dog to the vet on Tuesday?" Or, "Hey, Mike, good to meet you last week. Let's get together again soon. Are you coming to my party on Friday?" And then it just became too obvious that something was going on here. And I wanted to do kind of a PSA episode to keep people safe from this scam and maybe give people something to listen to if they're being targeted by these folks. Give people something to use as ammo if one of their friends and family is getting wrapped up in this scam, which is called the pig butchering scam or the shazhupan. You rode one of these out for a while. I did it in preparation for the interview, but I know you've done this a few times. Tell us a little bit about how these work.
Well, primarily the victims of the Xiaojupan scam are Chinese people themselves. Okay, and it's been a very successful scam in China. They've made billions of dollars out of this scam, scamming people. And it really comes from this whole idea of slaughtering the pig. So you raise a pig from a young piglet all the way up until it gets to a big fat slaughtering, age, and then you slaughter it. And that's where the scam name comes from. Because this kind of scam, it's kind of a long game. They start out small, make friends, raise you, so to speak, by constantly involving themselves in your life, getting you to trust them. And then they start to interest you in investing in cryptocurrency. Mostly it's cryptocurrency that they do, but there are other ways that they do it too. And get you to a point where you're so happy and so trusting that you're willing to drop a lot of money on this scam. And once they've received that huge amount of money from you, they then, slaughter you, so to speak, and take all your money and run. Now, this was so successful in China that the authorities actually started to crack down on it in a big way. And not only did the authorities start to crack down on it, but it became very common knowledge, to the point where people just weren't falling for this scam anymore because they'd heard about it. So then they started to target the Chinese diaspora abroad. And China has this very interesting kind of a situation when it comes to scammers. And I guess we can really trace this back to the whole century of humiliation that China constantly goes on about suffering, at the hands of foreign powers like the British in the Opium Wars and so on and so forth. It's almost accepted within China, in fact, it is accepted, to scam and take advantage of foreigners. But if you start really scam local Chinese people, that's when you get into trouble. But if you scam foreigners, you don't get into trouble. Now, this is relevant because they set up these scam call centers in Cambodia and Laos and, neighboring countries. And the reason they do this is because the internet is not blocked in those countries, and it makes them it's much easier for them to then go and scam people abroad using, WhatsApp and Line and all these other programs, not just WeChat. And of course, it's harder for them to get caught by the Chinese authorities. But they were scamming the local people in China so much that the authorities started to crack down and actually send task forces over to capture the people in these different countries, or they would threaten their families locally and tell them, if you don't stop scamming and if you don't come back to get arrested, then your families are going to go to jail and so on and so forth. So they changed their tactics to no longer target local Chinese people as much and start to target people abroad. Now, in the beginning, they would target the Chinese diaspora because it's, Chinese speaking, and the majority of the scammers were Chinese speaking. And you may have received voice messages or phone calls where you hear a recorded voice in Chinese.
Oh, yeah.
This scam kind of evolving to target the Chinese diaspora. And my wife, actually, Chinese, living here in the States with me, she got targeted by one of these guys as well. And there's another very interesting twist to all of this. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but we're quite used to being targeted by female, good-looking Asian women, is usually they target men abroad. But in China, it's actually the opposite. It's usually handsome men targeting women. It's a different it's a different thing. So anyway, sorry, they started to target the diaspora abroad, but then of course they targeted the diaspora a little bit too much. People got in the know, so it wasn't working as well. And of course, they can get into trouble if they're targeting Chinese citizens. So they started to move on to foreigners, because if they scam foreigners, they're completely safe. There will be no repercussions at all from the Chinese government if they target foreign nationals, because the Chinese government, in fact, in a way, encourages this behavior because of the rhetoric, the constant nationalist, xenophobic rhetoric that's going on right now in China. And I've experienced it firsthand in China through various scams. And being able to speak Chinese, I would be there trying to buy something in a shop, in a market, and they try to overcharge, like really overcharge me. And I remember right in the beginning when I was in China, I was trying to buy just a hat from a vendor, and the guy tried to charge me 10 times the price of what it normally is. And I heard another Chinese person come into the shop, and he offered the price of 10 times less because I could understand Chinese at that point, enough to understand. So my girlfriend came in, and I told her to ask the guy, why is he trying to charge me so much? So she started to argue on my behalf, and he said to her, and this is kind of important, he said to her, why are you helping this foreigner? We Chinese need to help each other and stick together, against the foreigners. So this is a mentality, and I'm
Right.
explaining this because it's important. There are no repercussions when you scam foreigners. So that's why it's safe for these scammers to scam foreigners, and that's why they've gone to these great lengths of getting people who can speak English, hiring people and real people. It's not just some guy sitting there on a keyboard. They'll get young, pretty girls, and they'll get, women and normal people that can speak English to actually, start these scams, and they pay them, of course. They're like paid actors working for the scammers. So that's why you're starting to see an uptick in this stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's always been an Asian woman, not always Chinese in the photos, but definitely Chinese. And I know you mentioned this in your video as well. So they'll inevitably send photos, usually, well, always actually, without me even asking, because I don't care. I'm not trying to get a photo of you holding your dog. I'll say, good luck finding the dog. But before I knew it was an obvious scam, I'd say something like, hey, wrong number, but good luck finding your dog. And then minutes later or an hour later, I get a photo of some cute Korean girl or maybe Chinese using a gazillion Instagram filter or app filters holding a dog. Or they're like, just going to work out. Hope your day's going well. And I'm like, why would you text someone else that just already told you this is the wrong number? Mm-hmm. And I think they all think we're into fitness, or it's maybe an easy way to show off their body because it's like midriff, tank top, tights, whatever. And they're trying to get the guys hooked. And then they'll be like, I live in New York. You should come to one of my dinner parties. And I'm like, oh, cool. I don't live in New York, but whatever information you obviously have in front of you says that I do because I used to. So I'm like, now I know who leaked my number or whatever. And at first I thought this was Chinese Communist Party intelligence officers trying to honey trap me because that has happened before. I don't know. Is that something that you're comfortable discussing or able to discuss on this, the honey trap? Because I know that maybe you have maybe this is something you have experience with.
Oh, yeah. No, that's actually happened to me in the past. I have a video about being honey trapped and how they attempted to honey trap me by wanting to interview me. And, oh, yeah, come and to this hotel. Here's my hotel room. Come to we'll have an interview in my hotel room, and then sending pictures, of a very scantily clad, attractive woman showing her bra and so on, and being like, come, let's have an interview type thing. Obviously a setup in order to try and do something to me, and either blackmail me or try to beat me up or, kidnap me, or who knows what they're trying to do. But it was definitely a honey trap thing. That's happened a lot. But when it comes to these scams, they do use pretty women, the pictures of pretty women, of course, just to thirst trap men. That's the whole point of this thing. It's kind of easy. Men tend to switch off a lot of the defense mechanisms when there's a pretty girl around. You tend to start to kind of relax just relax, and maybe you become a lot more gullible. So
I think so. Yeah, it turns off critical thinking because you might actually, you have a 1% chance that this is real. So you're like, I'm going to lean into this one because guys we think with our, sometimes.
No, men are stupid when it comes to women. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting how that it's switched around. Like I said, it's usually men that target Chinese women, and they build up a big, long relationship. And like I said, the one with my wife, I actually encouraged her to lead the guy on a little bit. And he used to send her long voice messages, because it wasn't just text, in the beginning here, targeting foreigners, it's usually just text because they can't speak English. So they use translation software or whatever the case. But they've gotten to a point now where they're hiring people that can speak English. But anyway, with the Chinese side of things, they'll get this guy to talk and say how much he feels like she's so kind and such a nice person. And, like they really could be friends and all this kind of stuff. Long. You can see where it was going. So we played this thing along for quite a while. And I'd listen to the messages as well. And the tricky tactics that they use, they're very good at being able to take advantage of, say, a lonely woman, with all these, sending them like all these complimentary messages. And it even gets to a point where they might send little gifts and things like that if they're in China. You see, they'll buy something on Taobao
wow.
and send it through and do this kind of thing. And it builds up and it builds up to the point where they get them to invest a huge amount of money, and then they take it, of course, and leave it. But yes, when they moved into the Western sphere, they realized that the tactic that works the best is to just steal photos, usually from WeChat groups, because people are getting wiser and wiser. If they see a photo and they're a little bit suspicious, they might do a reverse image search on Google to try and see if that photo is like a stock photo or a model's photo or something, right? And so in order to avoid that, they go to their WeChat friends groups, because, on WeChat, it's kind of like Twitter or Facebook together. And you have a moments section where people post their everyday life. So, here I'm eating my
this is a
lunch.
Chinese app that's like Facebook plus Twitter plus PayPal plus TikTok, probably all in one. I don't know.
It's everything. You pay your gas bill through that app. You buy tickets. You do everything. It's like a banking app too. It's everything all in one, but it's got this section of it called Moments. And if you scroll through your Moments posts, if you've added somebody as a friend somewhere down the line, you'll see everything they post. And of course, in today's sort of narcissistic social media type setup, you will see everything. People posting their breakfast and their lunch and I went to the gym or whatever. So you get all these pictures. So they grab them off of there because you can't find those on a reverse image search because it's a closed system. The Chinese WeChat and the intranet is kind of closed off. Those photos don't go anywhere else. So they'll steal from somebody, or in my case, I did that thing where I scammed the scammer, so to speak. The scammer named Salad, that's what she called herself, which is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, I found out that the pictures they were using were actually from an Instagram model. Okay, and in fact, I got contacted by a lawyer asking me to please take down the pictures because the Instagram model's life was being affected by my video. So of course I did. I didn't realize that it was a real Instagram model.
Right.
So I blurred her out. But the fact of the matter is they go and they find these photos and they'll start to try and entice you with little bits here and there in order to try and build a bond. But the interesting thing, like I said, is that they're starting to use people that can speak English. So they sometimes send voice messages as well, which really just ups the game, so to speak, because you can use translation software all you want. But when you start to speak to someone and when you start to send little video clips and things like that, it really makes it more believable.
The idea that China might invade Taiwan, my family has been increasingly worried about this. I've been less worried about it because you'd have to be even more crazy looking than Putin to think now's a good time to do that, especially given that like Russia can withstand some sanctions. I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
The biggest hit that we would feel from the American side of things would be in tech manufacturing, because that's all been outsourced to East Asia. But very, very painfully little of the value add is done in China. There's much more done in the rest of the Asian countries. So I'm not suggesting that we would walk away and not feel the difference. Like iPhone has, for example, completely doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down. Anytime there's been a problem with China, they put in more money. Stupid will cost them the company in the end, but it's really the only company that's gone that far. For everybody else, when you're talking about electronics and widgets and telephones, it's going to hurt. But that's the only sector. And there's nothing about the technology that is required to do that we can't do in the Western Hemisphere, with the exception of low-end semiconductors. And I'm kind of counting on Vietnam to fill that gap because they're moving up the value-added scale so quickly, so much faster than the Chinese did. But aside from that, food, no. Energy, no. Tech, No. Finance, we'd probably actually get a huge surge, just like we did after the Asian financial crisis. So in most sectors, there would be disruptions, but it would be even short-term gains for the American market. But in electronics and computing manufacturing, that is where we would feel it. That's unavoidable.
Yeah, and that's a huge sector. I mean, tech companies have global markets. I don't know what percentage or share of U.S. GDP it is, but it's probably not small.
It's
so
less
yeah.
than 2.
Really? I'm surprised to hear that.
All manufacturing as a component of trade is less than 2% of GDP. Remember, only about 15% of US GDP total is involved in international trade.
I did not know that. Okay,
Yeah.
well, wow.
The single biggest sector of that 15% is energy. And not necessarily imports. It's like the United States, Canada, and Mexico import and export among them. That's counted in that number. And then the next biggest part will be manufacturing, again, in and out of Mexico and Canada. So if you remove the NAFTA economies, and if you remove energy from the math, you're really talking less than 5% of GDP for everything else combined.
Why didn't we outsource things to Mexico, such as the iPhone manufacturing? Why did the tech go to China? There must be a compelling reason for this.
Sure, there's a couple reasons. Number one, you may remember back to the Mexican-American War, we took half their territory, and that's still smarts.
Okay, I
And
understand
so there's
that.
always been this strand in Mexican political thought, which is hard to deny, that the Americans can't necessarily be trusted. And we've not always been the best of neighbors. In the ideology as it evolved during the Cold War, that meant when the United States created the globalized order and everyone joined it in order to get economic goodies and security protection, Mexico didn't, because they still didn't trust us. So it wasn't until the tequila crisis of 1995, and the negotiation of the NAFTA Accords, which, thank God, Canada convinced us to bring the Mexicans into that. So 1995 is kind of the magic year when the Mexicans really took it seriously and started integration. And since then, they've become our largest trading partner. And I'd say, are fast on their way to becoming one of our fastest friends. That's kind of the first big piece. The second big piece is Mexico, from a topographical point of view, is not like the United States. So, we'll have like a regional city, let me just pick one out of the air, Des Moines. And it's surrounded by a series of suburbs, and then beyond that, small towns. Because, it rains in Iowa, and so you have farms and you have townhouses in small towns. It doesn't rain in northern Mexico. It's desert. And so you've got a series of isolated population communities. And in a pre-integration NAFTA system, that made education really difficult. Because, you might have an island of educated people, but then nothing else for hundreds of miles. That makes it really hard to do value added. So when
you say value added, can you tell us sort of what that definition is?
Sure, like taking some sort of raw material and turning it into an intermediate product, or taking that intermediate product and adding value to it and including it into a larger material. So steel into wire, spark plugs into a carburetor unit, that kind of thing.
Okay, gotcha.
So 1995 is really when the Mexicans started on that path. And since they didn't have the tech or the capital, it was up to Americans to come into Mexico, set up factories in league with local Mexican workers and bigwigs, and produce. Now, the Mexicans since then have taken it and run with it. It's one of the best the best modernization stories we've got. But they still are limited by those pockets of population. And so they don't have any of them that are large enough with a big enough cadre of skilled labor to do something like high-end electronics. There just isn't a national or regional history of large-scale precision manufacturing. So the US does the high-end chips. Thailand and Malaysia do the mid-level chips, and China does all the low end. But no one in North America can take that from China because we don't have the labor structure for it.
Gotcha.
Ours is too well skilled, and the Mexicans are skilled differently. So I really do look to countries like Vietnam to kind of plug the gap, but you don't do that in a year.
When we're talking about low-end semiconductors, high-end, I assume, is like an Intel chip that's inside, or an Apple M1. Low-end is what's in like a TV remote? There's a semiconductor or 10 in here.
Probably.
Right?
Anything that's part of the Internet of Things is probably from a Chinese fab facility.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious about that because I didn't even realize there were other sorts of chips. I did read that the U.S. threatened to shut down China with respect to semiconductors, and there was a lot of speculation that we couldn't do that. But
it depends on how you define semiconductor.
Right. That's what it sounds like.
In the United States, we only make 11% of the world's chips by number, but we make 60% by value. So if it's going into a high-end phone, if it is going into a laptop or a server, that is definitely an American chip, or maybe from Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan. If it's going into your car or your plane, something where it doesn't have to be nearly as small because you've got some room to work with, that's probably out of Thailand and Malaysia. And if it's your blender singing when you've pureed to a certain level of consistency, that's definitely out of China.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And Reddit, to the rescue, has explained that it's really hard actually to dump firmware from a properly protected semiconductor or a microprocessor. So you can't just like rip the thing open and attach wires to it and say, that's how this thing works. Let's make these. Let's just make these. You can't really do it. And the firmware is almost always heavily encrypted. That's one of the reasons why, I mean, hackers might be able to grab it, but then they have to grab all the new designs, which change every 6 months and are doubling in power.
Well, think of it this way too. If you've got a high-end chip, let's say you are in China and you've got a dozen people who can break it down, hack into it, figure out how it was put together, and come up with the plans to do it. Well, that's 12 dudes. You now have to educate 250 million dudes. There's a scale issue. And China does not have an education system that generates people capable of creative thought in sufficient numbers to engage in a French-style industrial espionage economy. The French could do it because they've been doing this for a very long time. And it's a sticking point in the relations with everyone. But with the Chinese, they came from a low base, and their education system promotes obedience and memorization. And while there are roles for that in any economy, when that is the definition of your workforce, it's just really hard to move up the value-added scale. And even if tomorrow the Chinese invaded Taiwan, conquered it without destroying it, and they just walk into TSMC, they couldn't operate those facilities. They'd just be paperweights. So this idea that China is this technological marvel that's going to take us over, I mean, it just ignores basic math, which I also find amusing that it's an American argument.
Well, we're full of bad arguments. What can I say?